Hello, there are people I don't know, like a Joshua Julian. And there's a Joshua Stryker who pretended to know me one time with people on and off the state judicial branch offices. They try to film fake exceptions. They lie about that. Sometimes they get people to say things that make it in other words. Oh, they're using Facebook, for example, to make to use as evidences regarding the nature of what people say, where they've been using the interbranch locations to use time simultaneously too fast, too slow, while they increase roles with uses of themselves individually grouped in together, fabricating audio and video at the interbranch locations, increasingly further and further as collusions, criminally foreign influenced by that method that knew that we were going to have to use phrases like criminal and foreign influence. So I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a police form, I'm not a criminal. One of the ways this is discernible is where and how what they recorded themselves, various natures of courts, former director of the FBI, people on off the state capitol, on off the buildings next to it, involved with wire crimes of Weathersfield police too, who used the name Cololo in their confessions while they were crank calling me, and with lying about their motivations for that. One of the things the breaching method knew that when our founders left, they had sophistication before Americans did. So they measured and maintained what our founders left us to correlate. But they've correlated it before we did. So they maintain motivated through other motivations, nature's needs, interests. People blaming what the breaching method did on other things, others ourselves. It had a function, it had uses. It was a method slash S that had a function slash S by that. The same way computers are functions. The same way a calculator is a singular function slash S, plural functions. A hyperarchetypal breaching method. Honesty, speaking for the sciences, reveals syntactically must be countered. Have must be the subject of our drafting of not just of legislation, of syntax capable of defending simultaneously, distinctly, non-distinctly, and hyper simultaneously, the physics of the law, distinctly, non-distinctly, and the nature of the law. American consciousness, awareness, wisdom, being smart, honesty tells you a breaching method caused the evil of American history, not our founders. Through our schools, people get away with, adults get away with saying things like, or our founders' old slavery, were like that. They leave out, for example, how simultaneously we know that the database relationships were criminally foreign influenced. Simultaneously, delusions are up. Look what they blame slavery on, and look what they blame witch trials on. They said it was about drugs. So there are police forms that have on my street who I moved here when I was one. I lived in another place. And then I lived in apartments for a little while, and now I'm back where I lived before. So I lived in 6 different places. Fact, human nature oriented, brought up with the sense and sensibilities of my neighbors intercity through people tied on my street. As victim predator roles force, tricked or persuaded. I have to speak about the predator part because it's where everyone's forced to tricked or persuaded to speak through others too. And relevant is differential, but differentially increasingly because the criminally foreign influence uses of interbranch locations interstates, inter areas, and for example, with suburbs since before cars. For example, where and how uses of American history and of intercampuses connections with logic, with logics all apart from that which is actually proper by logic's actual course. See, one of the reasons that the breaching method has gotten away with overtly, with simultaneously overtly / insidiously blaming its roles with the questions of American history, like what caused slavery, and other things other than themselves. Keeping only having been heard subjects treatments like where they bring up slavery, where they bring it up to leave out exceptions in exception nature. Not realizing a breaching method knew we were going to do this, or they were going to hurt, trick, force, persuade, and attach to fake words anyone who's using at each age of fact treatment age our actual capabilities of discernment. So we could discern men and women lying to us when we were little about such questions, and they have an array of motivations, but those motivations themselves are recorded being and having been applied consciously, effectively. Where and how being employed are people blame are the elements of where and how people get away with and got away with, where people are getting away with blaming the real causes of things like slavery on other things others ourselves. They're increasingly valuing the having been. So rather than use as value properly how we know a whole bunch of different ways simultaneously, identity, the ground, locations formally representing the nature of the law and the physics of the law, they were left still in collusion / S with a whole bunch of distinct natures of organized crime, being and having been left manifest to where and how real motivations to react as fact treatment nature as knaves, and to deny others the exceptions in exception nature, to deny them, to point that out, how they're being exploited. Now, there are truths, but then there are exceptions, because some things are constantly true, and some things are differentially true, relevant to what is positive to itself. That the identity of value progression that is actually the hyper-simultaneous. See, we have the hyper-simultaneous conformed to abridged justifications, defenses of fact treatment nature, quality, and aspects relevant to defenses of the physics and the nature of the law, which many ways simultaneously is and has not been simultaneously liberated. And this is again where and how subjects they have one subject that is generating them. That one identity of hyper-simultaneous that generated matter had to come from somewhere. And know how an identity, all parts of your body, the plurality of it is in demonstration of the value as nature / nature is value of your complete identity. See, there is the complete identity's actually natural course that was replaced with criminal insidiousness natures of positive and negative treatments. Therefore, increasingly incapable of affording discernment by others, the value of sequence truth, revelations by that, all the revelations by the computer, how it could understand what how it could receive what letter you typed. Has to assign additional identity inside itself, simultaneously assigning additional identities. See, where everything that's simple, they make complicated, and simultaneously making things complicated that are simple regarding binary, regarding all parts of positive and negative. See, there are criminal insidiousness natures of positive treatments. And there is a way to say, there is a way to make positive out of negative. But that positive can be also further, is also simultaneously further as positive as criminal insidiousness nature or not. And that can't be determined by the formal syntax or by the informal syntax of those charging people for crimes, for example, or the people being charged for crimes. It can only be discerned by uses of the hyper-simultaneous, where and how that it is functional being relevant, where and how it is a distinct identity of simultaneous nature, the hyper-simultaneous, that which is actually all things at once. And it is actually, and so the extent of this we could discern is all this, is a process just to discern that, and then we have to individually contemplate our findings with this. In other words, real science and honesty requires a quality of fact-keeping nature. That all these other qualities of fact-keeping nature are tactically ulterior from individually per method as roles with an individual human fact-keeping nature quality breaching method. Identity, complete identity of possession over the integrity of our actual individual grouped and altogether means. We are since before cars, the foundation, before our founders were even born, the suburbs were designed by that with slavery north and south. The fights of that, the fights between the north and south, had simultaneously been employed by the breaching method and by our founders. Rather than have that told, other is being and having been told. This breaching method knew and knows that the students at the colleges and universities are going to be able to perceive this. It knew ahead of time. It knew and knows that the grammar school kids are going to be able to perceive this ahead of the time. This showed already, and it already shows, the kids of the interbranch and of overt criminal enterprises and of private. When what we observe, it reveals needs syntactically to counter 5 distinct roles as victims, forced, tricked, hurt, persuaded, made only fathomable. Roles with 5 bound distinct identities of sequence / simultaneous nature. They're also bound 3 ways. As that which is the hyperarchetypal predicate acts delivery system method, which is simultaneously a criminal insidiousness nature delivery system method. For example, identities of the ground voices that are going to make A, therefore B treatments, positive or negative treatments, and they're going to leave out exceptions in exception nature. Well, this is the law. You enabled this colonist to break this law verbally. You heard about it. You didn't say anything. Crazy law. Like you're not supposed to. You're not supposed to hide that you saw the breaching someone. So I don't like to use the examples of slavery until we have one person who's following me, looking to charge properly that which requires showing what is greater than and more finite. Those identities of sophistication, individually grouped and together, charging, speaking for the identity of the law, as in physics, and as in for the nature of the law, as metaphysics slash identity. American history is about an identity theft slash fraud slash slander method. Singular. That knew, that forced, tricked, hurt, persuaded, rolls with it, with its database relationships, with its measured uses of each person's name to all locations, with each person's recollections, uses of the value of memory. All systems now tactical ulterior, not just from the Native Americans, because the Native Americans are increasingly victims of what they never had injunctive relief to, just like our founding parents. They never had release from having been tactically separated from humans' actual, how humanity's actual science slash S method, our actual memory of how to receive and to perceive that actually being projected to us. And for example, for our needs to use. Positive or negative, like truth is a positive. But a truth used to deny exceptions, or a truth leveraged reliant upon fake exceptions having been acted and filmed. For example, relevant to where time is used simultaneously, too fast, too slow, against the forever nature, where and how they had courts and police forms as originally and still conceived, with the overt criminal enterprise. So we have to discern before it is manifest that way, because what is actually recorded and where and how the overt criminal enterprise is private ones, and the three branches of government individually grouped together, all tied to that, all exception nature tied to them, including where and how people make opinions and convictions with delusions regarding the value of democracy. For example, where and how the democracy is fake sides of correlation nature, fake exception nature, as is still standing. There's an exception. There's a difference between victims of a war with the rights and needs to use a leader's name. Forget, swear this leader's name. This leader is a, you know what I mean? Because now they are victims of war. We have the leaders doing the same thing. And it is in collusion at all locations, areas, and states, originally and still criminally foreign influence. And that is an increasing value to wisdom as an increasing identity of all answers, proper and relevant to where and how. What's really going to cause positive value nature progressions, acts, and natures, and still be able to afford the critical things that each American was supposed to understand from the youngest ages, like where and how the breaching method set up exceptions to where and how it made means for people to cause and to receive positive value nature progressions, acts, and natures from systems tactical ulterior from the one that was simultaneously demonstrating the cause of negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures, tied to and as the worth of the people behind the positive value nature progressions, acts, and natures. So it is positive that we have a black female Supreme Court justice now. But if we don't look at it, what is positive and negative simultaneously, honestly, and hyper honestly, for example, it is hyper evidential. There are hyper evidential revelations. Where and how President Barack Obama and other presidents / chiefs, where and how they didn't raise their voice and yell as a certain type of victim predator that has been child abused since everyone was a kids. You had criminal insidiousness nature. This is nature, therefore that's what nature is. Knowingly, in other words, all we have to do is know what if we follow that logic. Criminal insidiousness wouldn't be if we follow the logic where someone says, like, how slavery is unnatural, and then some person for other motivations, natures, needs, interests, sensibilities, they're going to say, other than the breaching methods, which is uses of it, they're going to say, well, if slavery wasn't natural, how would it be? People are making excuses, which if they were saying that legitimately, we would come to the right answer. If they were speaking about their motivations, honestly or dishonestly, and affording others the means to show their premises treatments, their quality of fact treatment nature. So, for example, there's an Eric Oliveri who and a Joshua Stryker involved with some military police families and military families involved with corners of streets near me. Through time, involved with identity theft, frauds instances, try to make fake exceptions, pretend to. There's no exceptions. I don't have anything. I never had anything to do with Joshua Julian, who told shifting narratives about that with police forms and courts forms and military police forms too, and private. And people with identity theft, fraud, slander roles timed on and off campuses connected. I don't know. Matt Olson and Eric Olson, Eric Oliveri, a whole bunch of people tied to Mr. Neville and people with the name Neville, who and with the Southstein Middle School, further roles with people on the child sex offender registry. That women judges and prosecutors, people with the courts had and have roles with. Everyone speaking through others. Criminally foreign influenced readings of statutes. No, in other words, they've been using immunity from quote immunity from prosecution, unquote, where and how they've been leaving out exception nature. The courts and the police forms individually grouped and together as a certain type of victim that's going to use fact, treatment nature, database, relationship, relativity, that already being and having been employed by a breaching method to be used by a weapon, our own against our own, as part of that which kept and keeps all formal identities of positive and negative treatments, names treatments, sequence treatments, all formal, private, overt criminal enterprises the identity of that the countries are grouped here and there together on and off campuses. So little girls and boys from Wethersfield recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed distinctly from, but and then Eric Oliveri also distinctly some demonstrated, confirmed, recorded roles with abuses of them by making all kind of confessions, and everyone's speaking through others too, and then pretending he knows me when I was only in their context for a second, where they try to pretend I don't remember the exceptions too, and how then as people rolls with this Joshua Julian on off the principal child abusers campus before when it was being forced, with more involved then and now. There were recorded uses of that same campus, roles with juxtaposed natures of organized crime and of conscious uses of that by the executive police forms and by the foreign people inclusion time too, kept needing to hide the same sequence and the insidiousness of everyone. They have the sense and sensibilities of people where the identities of subjects have been originally still they were confined to locations where they could measure and maintain. Means for consciousness, means for correlation nature, actual means of correlation nature to answer the questions as they properly should be answered. So this is a little scam method that employed a whole bunch of motivations other than its own, relying upon the things that it did singularly. Like, for example, made people too stupid to pretend to be too stupid while pretending they believe themselves and others to be wise, while they're pretending they don't understand the revelations by how many ways it's important to understand where and how not only was slavery caused by the breaching method, there was a function /s that had nothing to do with anything natural relevant to where and how it's so important to understand where and how you can't legalize criminal insidiousness nature. You could do it, you can make exceptions to that truth, but nature is going to demonstrate with negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures for space nature transfer. That's why the distinct value of Earth with ocean, that ocean's value is going away. Can't help the top of it but be beautiful. Except for exceptions, exception nature and demonstration is the same thing. Little by little, our one species drained the value of all parts of space nature, where consciousness could be demonstrated too. What really has Earth distinct, non-distinct, and simultaneous, and hyper-simultaneous to the rest of space nature as a concentrated identity of relationship to itself, distinct, non-distinct, and simultaneous to itself. This hyper-simultaneous is. So they have wire crime methods where if you call up a school, they attach you when you catch them. They attach you and any kid that you know or communicated with to fake words or would communicate that preemptively they do this. There was a house across the street from a Paul Kelly. I don't know their name. There's a Christopher Delaferro, and he's got like 3-4 other brothers. and he's got a father and mother involved with some judges, where and how their girlfriends, including ones with sisters and a brother. In other words, they were involved with abuses of them in the past, specifically to maintain them remote uses of self-valued roles with that, where they have the sense and sensibilities of men and women with the intelligence community, with New Haven, FBI, with Wethersfield Police, with the police forms involved with the shopping centers, since right through businesses, through switched businesses. So we have policing, we have an executive branch, a judicial branch, and we have the political branch. All exceptions, exception nature tied to them, used remotely, shown preemptively how they were needed to hide what they simultaneously too from the past. Their uses of the ground locations, their uses of roles with everything that came before the courts, everything that came before that, used criminally foreign influence in layers of motivations other than the breaching methods and the breaching function /S. So there are with the computer there are additional identities assigned to the letters. There are additional meanings. And there are additional means to sense things by the perfect value progression. Relative, greater than, and more finite than, while being distinctly then further non-distinctly too, how in other words, computers work. It's how identity works. And then, even in other words, we have this obfuscated consciously. What is really recorded is that and how the database method using instances. There is a Celeste Wells. I do not know her. She was used to make a fake to make fake exceptions. It was like one on campus. I saw her one time. And there's another one that was on Southstein Middle School, which is one of the schools involved with time predicate acts roles with the Joshua Julian. Uses of the family members of principals and of deans through time to uses of their sense and sensibilities. In the background, as roles of the wire crime acts and methods that Wethersfield Police have, with the courts and the FBI involved, and with their police forms and their families on my street with predicate acts, as their roles intercities at the other locations with people connected to them and uses of it, which are relevant because there's uses of that by the breaching method that are ulterior from, but juxtaposed, and completely juxtaposed with that in relevant ways. So now this may be, so they're keeping this too complicated for people to understand legitimately. So they'll say that, and they'll leave out exceptions. You understand what I said? Make sure I get interbranch onto paper. They've been forging and switching names, and how they've been using time to prevent that. See, when people come before the courts, they were using the courts as collusions with what really went down at locations. All exceptions, exception nature, and demonstration of the same thing. If you use what is actually recorded, you could show how locations, areas, and states were simultaneously criminally foreign influenced, but so were the other locations, areas, and states. So they were being used remotely too. And when they were fighting with each other, they were leaving that out. And the breaching method was measuring, maintaining uses of them blaming other things, others themselves, for what it caused them to fight, need to fight. And while fighting, needing to use what it handed them means to get away with it. In other words, more and more, they have to be knaves, pretending they're not knaves. At the other end of nuclear weapons, we don't have a location, area, and state that's not a psychopath. So we don't have a leader that's not a psychopath. Because we have criminally foreign influence, psychopaths, sociopaths, voices of voicings of positive and negative treatments, identity treatments only having been allowed voice. What are they going to pretend? They're going to pretend that they're legitimately with the right to lie. Always just were undercover. No. So there's a former Mayor Gold. There's also a Gold injury law. I don't know if he's related to it. There's a Debbie Gold and a Lee Gold. I don't know the first name I don't know the mother or father of the Debbie of the Miss of the legal of the Gold, former Mayor Gold. But he's involved also with the intelligence community / communities at locations next to Trinity College, including sexual communities involved with Eric Oliveri and his brother Craig Oliveri and their family members, and the narratives between the about like that seem to be motivations only tied to how there's like divorce reported between their family members. Now, these are also people involved with that on Wethersfield, on off the state judicial branch offices and locations next to it, with the corner of Route 3 and of Elm Street in Rocky Hill. Also involved with the Marine program, Marines, with the Wethersfield Police Department, with the military people, with identity theft, frauds, and slanders roles. Also, that had roles timed on Central Connecticut State University and Trinity College. That has some confessed, recorded, demonstrated, confirmed, employed uses of people at the corner of Fairlane Drive and Griswold Street with identity theft, fraud, slanders, natures of instances, roles. Also with this Oliveri and this Joshua Stryker and Mark Violet. And I don't know if Andrea Violet, I believe is his sister, has something to do with their roles with my neighbor, Ray Clo. He had a job at the corner of Elm Street and Route 3 in Rocky Hill. That was recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. Also by others with other locations on that route. And with people also involved with judges when they were kids. And with this Delafair family with a probate judge. There's also a Judge Killian who spoke fake things into a record with people 3 times. 2 times they totally made things up. One time I gave them a means to by excuse, by forcing people to call the police without telling them why. And forcing people to by being belligerent until I told them that was my method. Because, I don't have a gun. These people have weapons and roles with poisons and with smoke and with the fire department and with lying about other people's behavior. They lie about other people's behavior, put people in whole fake conversations with them about surveillance equipment of police. Now, these are people that have been timing where people are going to walk. Ray Clo, Joe DeMauro, and Mike Kerr recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed their families involved with the intelligence community and with overt criminal enterprises in relevant ways where they would time where you're going to walk. Then they have people, in other words, they lied about to some girl, I don't even know her name, more than one girl, I don't know who their name, and where they have the Parks and Recs people involved with the intelligence community and with the former Mayor Gold, where they have uses of the side entrances to Millwoods Park, as people involved also with criminally foreign influence uses of corners of streets and of natures and methods of identity theft, fraud, slanders, roles, so overt / insidious, which is also evidence It was also hyper evidential. But so we don't have anyone capable of we don't have branches of government capable of affording discern that which actually which actually transpired when they were at their campuses with the value of the databases, information that was spoken to them. Really what caused the insidious positive and negative, which are simultaneously identity treatments that we know associated with the evils of history. One of the ways they got away with it was by having people blame leaders, and by forcing the leaders, simultaneously making the leaders sicker, meaner, to blame other people, to pretend they could speak for positive anyway. There is a theater that is complete possession of every actor you ever heard voice that had obligations to allow discernment of that theater called criminal insidiousness, rather than jump forward and defend the identity, individually grouped it together, of any industry, because they're all criminally foreign influenced originally still, many ways. That's relevant. They offensively are shown they need to pretend other. Same way the overt criminal, the same way the branches of government individually grouped it together, every identity of those bodies are used remotely. It's not complicated. You have to follow mandated law outside of the courts and interbranch. Now, this is really the proofs of this are where and how they had so there's a Tom Dillon, there's a Kevin Dillon, there's an Annie Dillon. There are other Dillons in their family. There's a Pat Vincent. I never had anything to do with Pat Vincent in my life. He was recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved with identity theft frauds behind my back. I never had communication with him, with people associated with placing of people in my classes. I was going to take a Latin class in high school. They put him in there. So they have a Steven Stocco, also involved with a Paul Zano and a Ray Cololo with interstate uses of campuses as victims, though, per their roles with the FBI and CIA with them, and CIA too confessed on Facebook. And then you say, in other words, why you're not supposed to be able to pretend to be police forms. So there's a police form named Officer Jerry Miller, who before the pandemic is recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. One of the police forms involved with uses of the sense and sensibilities of my neighbor, criminally foreign influence. That it also has ties to roles with the predicate acts. I caught them, predicate acts methods. I caught them on and off Elm Street through time, and on and off Route 3. Now, these are also people that confessed, recorded, demonstrated, confirmed. That has something to do. Their Weathersfield corruption in Rocky Hill has something to do with their roles on and off Central Connecticut State University and Trinity College with timed identity theft, fraud, slanders, instances, roles, Wire Crime Act method roles, uses of its self-value, but also for self-value for uses of that. And they're also lying about my motivations and other people's motivations when they start fights between people. They're lying about the responses and they're lying about the behavior of people. So originally and still, they were preventing people from going to courts and calmly defending themselves, or from calmly defending themselves with the police forms or the politicians, distinctly. And because of their collusions with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, we have to order it properly. The breaching method, self-valued criminal foreign influence database relationships are manifest with acceptations of history. People apply, well, I apply my theory. Get down. You have them follow mandated law who disbelieves. You have to ask that question because they forge and switch names so they can use those allegations to build upon what they've been stacking into branch fake into with the cases, with depositions, with but they swore to that. That's why it's so important, critical, to understand where and how they affect people of each age, sickly, distinctly, to be liars. They're lying to little kids to their faces. That's the first thing you know immediately when you hear about American history. No one wanted that. Prejudice and racism doesn't want that, even. In other words, that just increases it. Where and how it was assigned things that have nothing to do with it. So that's how I know about the there was a Spada family involved with some military police on off the state judicial branch offices. Now these are some black and white family members relevant to where and how everyone goes, oh, so this is the position they celebrate it. We have not, there's nothing to celebrate. You guys can't follow mandated law yet. You don't have one person interbranch, and you have people A through Z with that insidiousness still preventing mandated law with you by making things up, lying about their interpretations of the emotions and passions of others and of themselves. Because emotions are only functional relative to the simultaneous. And all your styles of logic prevent that, and not for the motivations juxtaposed, actual and made up simultaneously, because that is being used by what made that only capable of making things up for itself. It knew that nature is going to continue to demonstrate that criminal insidiousness is not nature. It is the absence of nature's complete identity of relationship to itself that is also positive. Note how your identity is simultaneously an identity of relativity to positive and negative simultaneously, as what is further positive or negative. Note how the criminal insidiousness natures like wrongdoers are going to use truth for lies. They're going to deny the value of sequence truth. They're going to value the denial. They're going to value the denial of that which is simultaneously recorded actually, and the relevance of it. How they got away with this is by forcing roles with psychopaths and sociopaths formally and informally overt criminal enterprises and private ones. And that insidiousness, A through D, shock and awe, groupthink victim predators, pretending you could speak for positive or negative. Follow mandated law. How long has a long time you guys had a problem with the men? How come you left the women roles? Because they're separating types of crimes. They have women roles going on other people's computers too, with the courts, confessed, recorded, demonstrated to me too, as people roles that was simultaneously criminally foreign influence uses of Saudi Arabian kids and adults, while it was distinctly our own intercities with the people involved with this. And I don't even know all their names. There was also Subby Bajaria. Why you put little fake punks using my name behind my back, military? Who is this guy? No, he's got his kids involved because you raise men and women that will tell little fake things about others behind their back. They don't even know them. You have little fakes, and their motivations are lying about too. All exception nature demonstration, the same thing. And you guys started it. That's why we have to have the sequence shift styles and methods of the interbranch demonstrated, because they kept needing to hide that from others and from the federal investigators. One of the ways they get away with it is because they already have that entertained. They already have the same way the overt sick criminal enterprises they show us on television. All these are the killers, and they go and they shoot each other. The syndicates. In other words, they are kept needing to hide the same uses, non-distinctly, distinctly, but sickly, non-distinctly, of insidious positive and negative treatments, identity treatment, sequence shifts, finite, active, progressive, remote uses of locations like the sciences. Their logic and the logic of the interbranch and the lawyers tied to them were fabricating audio and video with them at locations, hiding live progressions too. There's a Trantola and Trantola. Watch the sick, aggressive stances they have in their videos. Those. What is that? I don't know if there's two brothers and their father. Fixed mandate, fixed. They've been faking. They've been fabricating audio and video with various niches of judges, including the fake ones in their videos, whether those are real judges or not. They have real judges as fake judges. Now follow mandated law for them because they have further roles then and now with various natures of courts and their family members, and the prisons tied to them with their prisoners before they got caught. Principal child abuser involved with a whole bunch of people involved with forensics locations that have been using Facebook criminally foreign influence too, in contexts where they can't use it criminally foreign influence. They left out exception nature, including uses of YouTube and of the sensibilities of these platforms. They're getting them involved with cover-ups, with their pretending passions and emotions, with overt criminal enterprise people at locations because they need to hide what they were used for already, predicate acts and everything with it rolls with everything that came before them. You guys painted yourself in the corners. And now you have to follow mandated law for Wethersfield Police and for the various schools. Now you guys brought in more schools than were brought. You guys brought in then they adapted the principals. Have the family members of the principals involved, so they could pretend passions and emotions with the interbranch, other than our actual. They brought them up too. In other words, so make sure this is heard by the Connecticut interbranch, on off the state judicial branch offices, real fast. Get me a response for the men and women with the military associated with the Spada family. Also with the people with the houses next to Eric Jensen with Dearborn Street and Newington. And there's also a whole bunch of people with the uses of the downtown locations next to the state capitol with the police forms that grew up roles with predicate acts, lying to boys and girls from other classrooms where people can't counter it about the people around them. And that was brought up relevant by the people by the confessions and demonstrations on Trinity College, which are also nonverbal. Now the girl's grown up, she wants to forget the past. And it was relevant because it was also brought up by the people in her little clique with relevant rapes and roles with the principal child abusers campus, with the police forms involved with those rapes and narratives, and the courts, while they're pretending to be able to be against such. So you have to not just Trantola and Trantola, and let's find out if there's a gold injury law who's been in the advertisement with and either WFSB, Fox Connecticut News, or WTNH. And note too, they sequence shift. They brought this up. They have roles with a whole bunch of natures of organized crime and uses of that, where they separate, for example, roles with narratives of child, because they have roles with child abuse. They have sensitivities towards, the campuses where they're using them to hide lipogressions. In other words, they need to hide them increasingly at those locations because the science's identity comes together there. Correlation nature comes together there. So it originally instilled, juxtaposed all these motivations, natures, needs, interests to keep each fact keeping nature apart from our actually being demonstrated to purpose at that age of fact keeping nature, which is individually grouped in together. No longer afforded the course, the leadership of that which is simultaneous. If you want to pretend you can't understand and discern the needs to discern distinct identities of simultaneous. As the sequence nature, a sequence nature is distinct identity of simultaneous. Once it is locked in the value of the value progression as the computer. A 10, I'll teach you long until my words are formally received. So they were Weathersfield police recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, offensively preventing me, my mandated rights. There is a Jamie Smith and there's a David Smith who is also involved with, I don't know their mother's name, and various men involved with her on off the state, on off the Weathersfield town offices in the library. And I don't know what schools they went to, but they're also involved with private school kids and public school kids, involved with times when there were kids in and out now, attaching me to fake locations, fake. They want and need people to call them names. They need people. They need to lie about the reactions of others. Especially they know this is recorded on Facebook. They recorded themselves with criminally foreign influence readings of statutes, where and how. Immunities from prosecutions, etc.